Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. So Sony, they actually had a little bit of a PlayStation event yesterday with CES 2023. Of course, they talked about various Sony products, as they usually do, but they did also specifically focus on their PlayStation brand quite a bit, and we're going to go over that today, including another significant milestone that they had reached, and I guess a new way to play your PlayStation 5 sometime in the future. I mean, I have to say, the future is getting pretty crazy. I think as a kid, we used to dream about this type of stuff, but we really are getting to that point where we're living in that crazy future that we envisioned just so many years ago. It's honestly amazing to think where technology is taking us, though sometimes it might be a little frightening, and some people might view this as, well, a little frightening. Also, there's been a lot of talk about a Switch successor to start off the year. Everything does point to a quote-unquote soonish Switch successor, but exactly what does that word mean, soonish? Well, an analyst did talk about that, and this seems to be catching a lot of attention online, so I want to go over that one as well. To start things off today, though, we did get an update for the ongoing Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition. Once again, this is a smaller update this time, but still highly important as we draw closer to their termination date, which is set for July 18th of this year. So we are anticipating big updates over the next few months, specifically from the CMA and then also the EU. As we talked about just yesterday, the decisions that they decide on is actually quite significant to the FTC versus Microsoft case, as Microsoft has already let it be known that they do plan on proceeding with the buyout if they approve of the deal. In other words, they're not going to wait around for the FTC. They're not going to back down from them. They will proceed regardless and just take the FTC to federal court as long as the EU and CMA approves. So this story is kind of shifted over to what the CMA and the EU decides, but unfortunately, because this just never seems to end, it was just announced today that the CMA has delayed their final decision to April 26. It was previously set for March 1st, so this is nearly a 2-month delay. However, and this is important to keep in mind, they did note that they want to complete this process before that date. So do keep that in mind. The good news here, though, is that their provisional findings are still happening relatively soon. That will either be late January or early February, and this is where we'll kind of see the CMA's line of thinking and whether or not they can find some remedies together with Microsoft if they have any issues at all. As we've really already seen, though, Microsoft seems more than willing to work on some concessions if need be. I'm sure that they would love to have no concessions whatsoever, but if they need to go in that direction, it seems like they're more than willing to do that. It's really just a matter of how severe these concessions are. If it's just Call of Duty staying multi-platform, they'll have no issue with that. They're already planning to keep a multi-platform anyways. But we're just going to have to kind of wait and see what these regulators want, if anything at all. Really, the question for today is, why did the CMA delay their decision? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for Microsoft? And really, I don't know if anybody can 100% tell you one way or the other, because I think you can view this a number of different ways. On one side, the CMA, they could be delaying their decision to see what other regulators do. This does now put their timeline behind the EU, which is set for April 11th. That could align their decisions a little bit more here. There's also a possibility that Microsoft has made a better case during the second phase of the investigation, giving the CMA more to go over, more to think about here. Or it could just be as simple as the CMA wanting to be as thorough as possible, whether good or bad. Whether they approve or block the buyout, they don't want an FTC situation where they have poor reasoning for their decisions. We're seeing in live action right now what's happening with all that. You have to remember, at the end of the day, this is a nearly $70 billion deal. And these regulators, they view it as a complex situation for that reason. They're going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb. So there's just a number of things that can be in play here, but one way or the other, a more clear picture should, we'll see about that, should start to form in late January or early February, when we'll start to hear more about the situation with a little bit more depth and clarity. Now, speaking of Xbox, a new third-party controller was just announced, though this one was particularly interesting as it actually seems to mimic a Microsoft patent that we've seen fairly recently. I will put that patent on screen here where you can clearly see that it has some sort of display right at the top. And it does appear that this patent has actually now come to life in some sort of partnership with Asus, as they just revealed their new ROG Valkyrie controller, which includes a 1.3-inch OLED display. You can easily see the similarities between this and that patent, and it appears that this display will show some useful information like battery life. You have microphone mute, charging status, and things like that. But if you're more interested in the customization side of things, it will also allow you to add your own custom animations, images, and text. It does also sport an RGB light because, you know, why not? And then my favorite part about this controller, it does have those back buttons, which are incredibly useful in competitive multiplayer games, or really with PC games that needs more buttons. And that right there, that is the thing about this controller. While this appears to be an Xbox controller, oddly enough, it doesn't actually seem designed for Xbox consoles. Yes, you actually did hear that right. The Valkyrie Pro has 3 connectivity modes. You have Bluetooth, then you have 2.4 GHz RF mode, and lastly, you have wired USB-C, which appears to be the only way to connect to your Xbox consoles. The wireless options are instead designed specifically for PC usage. Now, I imagine that this will also make for an interesting cloud-based controller, but unless you want to play wired, this might not necessarily be the best option for Xbox fans. Kind of an odd decision to make, especially considering I do imagine that the price is quite steep here. Now, they haven't announced anything just yet, but if I were to guess, I wouldn't really be too surprised if this is a $150 plus controller. I mean, sure, it is kind of cool and unique and everything, but even when it comes to the display, I kind of think to myself, is this really necessary, especially if it does have a high price? I don't really know how much use fans will get out of something like this other than for cosmetic reasons. But either way, if you like what you see, do keep an eye out for the Valkyrie Pro. Alright, so let's go and talk about Sony's 2023 CES showcase, where they talked a lot about PlayStation. Of course, we kind of knew that they were going to talk about PSVR 2 here, which they very much did. We'll get into that here in just a second, but there was a lot more here as well. So I'll kind of go over some of the highlights here, and that has to start with a new milestone for the PlayStation 5. They did officially announce that the PS5 has sold through 30 million units worldwide after it had its biggest month yet. Now, it is interesting that they announced sold through numbers here rather than shipped. Typically, they announce shipped, which is usually higher because that's what retailers get. But with sold through, that means that instead these 30 million units are in the hands of consumers. That there is actually even more impressive. Regardless, 30 million units sold is such an incredible achievement this early in a generation, especially when you consider they have dealt with stock shortages pretty much the majority of its life thus far. There is a possibility that it could have sold even more if it was more readily available. Now, to be fair, it does seem things have improved in recent months, thankfully, just as God of War Ragnarok released, but big congrats to Sony here. Now, with that said, I do kind of understand the irony of the situation. However, of course, Jim Ryan has tried hard to make Sony look vulnerable to regulators, as they don't want Activision Blizzard to be acquired. And, you know, here at the same time, they're putting up crazy numbers like this. So it doesn't really help their argument per se, but what I will say is that I genuinely do believe PlayStation has had a fantastic start to the generation thus far. I've personally been more than satisfied with the PlayStation 5 so far. They've put out some really great exclusives, and I think they're doing an outstanding job. Now, as for PlayStation VR 2, this thing's right around the corner, and questions are starting to pop up. They haven't really showcased this thing as much as you would expect them to, but they did go a little bit more in depth about its launch here at CES, which is planned for February 22nd. They did reveal it will launch alongside 30 different games, though I think it's kind of important here to point out PR speak. When you hear 30 games, that does sound great on paper, but it is important to realize that several of these games in question are actually games that are already out for other VR devices and will just be ported over to PSVR 2. So if you already have some type of VR device, you may have already played some of these games, but what I'll do here is that I'll include a list of the already confirmed PSVR 2 games, courteous of Twinfinite. That way you can have a more clear picture of what to expect. However, they did announce a couple VR games here, including Beat Saber. That is one of the most popular VR titles to date, and for a very, very good reason. I personally love this game myself. I have it on a couple of different devices, and it might be my favorite rhythm game of all time. So this is actually a great inclusion for PSVR 2. I mean, if you get a VR headset, I'll just kind of say it this way, this is a must-have game. The more interesting game here, though, because this is a new inclusion, is Gran Turismo 7. Yeah, that's right. It was revealed that Gran Turismo 7 will be getting a free PlayStation VR 2 upgrade, and this could actually be the perfect combination. Racing games, they just feel good in virtual reality when you're racing in that cockpit view, and considering Gran Turismo is all about realism, this is a simulation experience after all, this could potentially bring this game even more to life than what it already is. If PlayStation VR 2 is as good as advertised from a technological standpoint, Gran Turismo 7 could actually be a premier title here, and the fact that this will be one of its launch titles on February 22nd, this does make its launch a little bit more exciting. Now, speaking of Gran Turismo, though, they did also give us our first glimpse into their upcoming Gran Turismo movie. This is something that Sony's trying to do right now. They're committing a lot of resources in doing these game-to-movie adaptations, and Gran Turismo being one of the most recognizable franchises, they're taking a shot with this IP, and I think it does actually have an interesting story to tell. It's apparently based on a true story where a player took his gaming skills and won a series of competitions to become an actual professional racer. I think that's actually a pretty cool story. And it does also include Hopper from Stranger Things. I know a lot of you all probably know him, and I personally love that show. And it's slated for an August 11th theater release, so do look forward to that. That's not quite all, though, because they also revealed Project Leonardo, which is their own first-party accessibility controller. This is kind of similar to Xbox's adaptive controller, where it's meant to be more accessible to a wide variety of people who may struggle to play games otherwise. This is quietly, in my opinion, one of the better announcements made here, because this is huge for people who love games, but again, may have a condition that doesn't necessarily allow them to play with a standard controller. So I love this move by Sony. We need more devices like this in the game industry, especially from these console manufacturers. Now people that may have struggled before can play games like God of War Ragnarok or Horizon Forbidden West or whatever. This does make those games more accessible than before. Lastly, though, and this is where things get a little bit more strange or maybe exciting depending on how you look at this. I think it's certainly cool if anything, but Sony revealed a new concept car in partnership with Honda. It does go by the name of Afeela. Now, you're probably wondering why we're talking about a car on a gaming channel, and that's because one of its main attractive features is none other than PlayStation. Yeah, so the idea of this car is that it's a self-driving car. It has 45 sensors inside and out, which allows it to drive you to your destination. Now, we have seen things like this with Tesla and everything, but with Afeela, they want to give you a leisurely trip by allowing you to not only watch TV while your car is driving, but hey, if you want to play PlayStation games like Horizon Forbidden West as an example, well, it appears you might actually be able to do that as well. Yeah, that's kind of where we are in the world now. Technology is pretty crazy, but this might also actually be kind of scary depending on how you look at it. I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of bad drivers as I'm sure plenty of you all know, but I don't really know how confident I would be taking my eyes off the road and just trusting that these sensors will work 100% of the time. But hey, playing games on the PlayStation 5 in your car might actually be a part of the future relatively soon, as Afeela is planned for a 2026 release. There you have it, though. That was a lot to go over, but it was a fun overall PlayStation showcase to start 2023 with. Now, we do also have some more Switch Successor speculation. This has kind of been the thing to start 2023 with, but this time it's coming from an industry analyst, more specifically with the research director at Ampere Analysis, Piers Harding Rolls. Now, that's kind of intriguing because they work behind the scenes and research different markets to where they can put numbers and data together. So it is important for them to be able to look at a market, understand where things can go in the future, and then forecast that. And that's what he noted here, while talking about the console market for 2023 and his predictions with GameIndustry.biz. He did mention the Nintendo Switch successor by saying this: "I'm expecting the console market to stabilize in 2023 following a decline in 2022. The game's release slate is looking really positive." Yeah, you got that right. The first half of the year, It's pretty insane, but continuing on, he says, if availability of the PlayStation 5 holds up, it has a strong chance to be the best-selling console of 2023, with the Switch entering the later stages of its life cycle. The upcoming Zelda will sell plenty of Switch hardware, so it could be close. I'm not expecting a next-generation Nintendo console in 2023. We have 2024 in our forecasts. And it's that last part there that's catching everybody's attention. Right now, there's just so much speculation on when Nintendo will release their next console. The Switch is entering its 6th year after all, and it's usually about this point where we start to hear about that next platform. And then on top of that, here recently, we've been hearing from some pretty reputable outlets that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom could actually be the last major release for the Switch before focusing on its eventual successor. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that successor is releasing immediately, but you know, that is floating around. Truthfully, though, when I hear this prediction from Ampere Analysis, this isn't really too much different than what I've seen from a lot of fans. We have done polls on this subject before, and most of you do seem to believe that the Switch successor won't release in 2023, and I think that does make sense. The thing is that the Switch is still selling incredibly well, and ultimately, and I don't know if this is the right word to use here, but that's ultimately the problem Nintendo finds themselves in. Granted, this isn't really a bad problem to have, but they have to find a way to balance a new console release at the same time that they're selling their current hardware at a record-breaking pace. So what's happening here is that they don't want to rush things, but at the same time, they don't really want to wait too long either. So I think with all that in mind, I do expect 2023 to be another successful year for the Nintendo Switch. It might slow down a little bit. I mean, we are getting to that point of oversaturation, but I would, however, expect another big year, especially with Zelda Tears of the Kingdom involved. So if I were to guess right now, and this is my own personal prediction, I'm thinking an early 2024 release, similar to what we saw with the Nintendo Switch. Now, that's just my own personal prediction, but I would also love to hear y'all's predictions below as well. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, when do you think the Fable reboot will release? There's been a lot of speculation over this recently, so I wanted your all's opinions on this. And as you can see here, the majority of you all do believe it will release in 2024. 48% of you all did vote for 2024. 23% of you voted for 2025. 17% of you all just have no hope here at all, saying 2027 or beyond. And then 2023 and 2026 got 6% apiece. So, yeah, the majority of you all are expecting this game to release over the next 2 years, and I am with you all. I'm thinking a 2024 release as well. There was that rumor going around the other day that it had completely restarted with Unreal Engine. That has already been debunked, but there has been some questions about them using Forza Tech. There was a report going around as of recent that its development has been slow because they opted in using Forza Tech. Now again, that doesn't mean that there's trouble in development or anything like that, but rather the problem here is that they do have contract work, and what happens is because these contractors, they don't know how to use Forza Tech, they have to learn that on a job, and then they leave, and then you have another person that you have to teach again, and that has made development a little bit slower. But yeah, I am kind of expecting a 2024 release as well, and it does seem like most of us are on the same page here. It seems like there's very few people that believes that this game will release in 2023, and I think that's a good thing because that way nobody is disappointed by the lack of Fable this year. There, however, is plenty of other big games that could release this year from Xbox, whether that be Forza 8, you have Starfield, that's going to be a huge title, there's Redfall. These are all just kind of in the first half of the year, and then maybe possibly in the second half we could see something like Hellblade 2, or maybe something like Avowed alongside some other surprises. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.